And so what we're going to cover today is a couple of different topics. So we're going to start off talking about carryover injury. So what effects we're going to have if we have some carryover from our herbicides from our previous crop into our wheat. And then we're going to talk a little bit of weed control, and we're going to focus primarily on annual ryegrass or Italian ryegrass. All right. So what I want to start off with here is I just want to start off talking about carryover. So when we're talking about carryover, we're talking about herbicides that we apply in the crop previous, whether it's corn, tobacco, maybe soybeans in some cases. But the concern is that we spray some of those herbicides and they carry over into our wheat acres, okay? This is where you guys get involved because I'm going to start asking you guys questions, all right? What influences if a herbicide carries over into my next crop? Anybody? Rainfall. All right. Anybody else? Timing? pH? Tillage? Anything else? The rate? Okay. I'm looking for one more. And maybe this one's just too obvious. The herbicide, right? So the herbicides that we spray, the herbicides are not all going to carry over, correct? So it depends on what the herbicide is. They all have their different characteristics. So let's start off just with weather. You said rain. What effect does that have?
Well, if it doesn't rain a whole lot, there's a greater chance to carry over certain things.
Right. So there's a great chance of carryover if we don't have the rainfall, okay? Rainfall plays a large part in how our herbicides carry over. So I guess we should have backed up a little bit here. So what's the fate of a herbicide when we apply it to the field? The fate in that soil. There's a lot of different things that can happen to these herbicides. Yeah, I know. I'm supposed to be handing this around.
Yeah. I can run it for you if
All
you
right.
want me to.
Now this is really going to put the pressure on them. Yeah. So when we apply that herbicide, what's it going to do? Or if it hits that soil, what's different places it can go? So we have microbial degradation. Organic matter. So organic matter can tie up those herbicides. So let's go back to the rainfall. If we get a lot of rain, we don't like this happening, but what can happen to those herbicides? Runoff and leaching, okay? So, weather plays a large part in that, and that's where the rain comes in. Rainfall is probably the largest factor we have as far as herbicide persistence in our soils. If you have a lot of rainfall, we actually don't have that herbicide stick around as long as sometimes we want it to, right? Because the residual herbicides, the herbicides we're concerned about are the herbicides that have soil activity, right? Some of our herbicides will actually bind to that soil very quickly and have no residual at all. So gramoxone is an example of one of those, right? We spray that stuff, it attaches to the soil immediately, it has no residual. Glyphosate's another one. Glyphosate, it's broken down very quickly. We don't worry about residual in that. But there's certain herbicides we do have residual, and we like that, right? And if you've heard Dr. Martin talk, or if you heard me previously talk at my previous institution, I talk till I'm blue in the face about residual herbicides because we're pushing them so much, right? But those residual herbicides depend a lot on rain. So if we have a lot of water, a lot of rain, not only do we have maybe some leaching and some runoff, but we're also going to have, so right here, what did you say? Microbial degradation. Okay? So, does anyone know what kind of conditions a microbe's like? If you're a microbe, what kind of conditions do you want? Moist? Do you want it dry? No? Do you want it warm or do you want it cold?
Warm.
Warm. All right. So, warm conditions and moist conditions, not wet. If we're saturated, our microbes will shut down. But the majority of our herbicides are microbially degraded. Okay, there's some chemical degradation, but the majority of them are microbes. Microbes do a lot of work for us in the soils of breaking down these herbicides. So if we have a dry summer, what do we worry about? We worry about carryover. That's when we start getting worried. Or if we have just super wet summer, a lot of saturated soils, again, the microbes are kind of like their comfort zone, right? They like that moist, but they don't like to be oversaturated. But it's really dry conditions that we get really worried about. And I looked, and we did have some pretty dry conditions this year compared to normal. We weren't in a drought by any means, but we certainly could have some carryover. Okay. The other weather pattern that wasn't mentioned, and maybe it's not quite as obvious, but temperatures. Okay. So we mentioned they like warm soils, so that's the reason why over the wintertime we don't get herbicide breakdown, because those microbes are shut down because it's cold and microbes aren't doing a lot in the soils for us when it's that cold. Okay, so all right, the other thing we talked about was rate and timing, right? And that's pretty simple. How much of the product did we put on and when did we put it on? Okay, so if we put on a lot fairly late in the season, that's when we start to get worried. And that's why I threw this up here, because it's primarily our corn herbicides that we think about. And so I gave you a few examples of these up here, and I'll have you come up here and look at these. But basically, we're just looking, if you're going out late with herbicides, with the residual herbicide, that's when we might start getting worried if we're going at high rates. Okay, so it's all about rate and timing. All right, the last one that was mentioned, I believe you mentioned it, maybe, soil properties. Or does anyone remember one of the soil properties? pH. Yep. So, and this doesn't apply for all of our herbicides, but pH can play a role in how long our herbicides stay in the soil, or how long that residual is there. Okay, so typically it's some of our ALS inhibitors that we start to look at this, and when we start getting pHs above 6.5, 7, 7.5, that's when we start seeing those herbicides have a little bit more half-life. We start to see those carryover effects start to take place. Okay, so those are things we think about, and so really it usually starts with, okay, I'm going to plant my wheat. What kind of summer did we have? Was it dry? Do we have ample moisture and we're good to go? But if we had a nice dry summer, that's when we start saying, okay, we need to think about this. All right. And then, or we just say, what did we do in our corn crop? All right. Did we go out there because we need to do some rescues and sprayed something pretty late? That's what we need to think about. All right. So what I'm going to have you guys do is I'm going to force you to get involved here. All right. Because they told me this has to be hands-on. So what we're going to do is I have 8 flats up here. So there's 2 flats here, there's 2 here, 2 here, and 2 here. What I want you guys to come up, and what I did is these were planted last week, and these all had some type of residual herbicide on them. So what I want you to do, I'm going to give you 5 to 10 minutes. Just come through here, look at these. Just jot down, and you have both wheat and some ryegrass in here just to give you another species. Write down what you see, what kind of injury symptoms you see, and then if you want to take a guess of what it is, write that down as well, and then we'll come back and look over these, okay? Did you see any symptoms on these? Anything? One thing I don't have up here is really a check to show you, right? So that's unfortunate. Hindsight's 2020. So if we do compare it to some of these others, there's a little bit of stunting. Really, this just needs a little bit more time. If you look really closely, we're starting to see a little bit of chlorosis on it, but to be honest, if I walked in here blind, I'd probably say, I don't know what that is. Okay, it's too early to tell what this is. This is actually Accent. It's an ALS inhibitor, and that's not something I really would typically expect because usually we're not going to be applying it that late. But the reason I picked it is because it is something we can apply a little bit later in the season. If somebody's wanting to go out and rescue some grasses, I'm not saying it's going to happen a lot, but I just wanted to give you some examples. And typically what we're going to expect, if we have a carryover of an ALS inhibitor, it's going to be pretty hard to diagnose, I'll be honest with you, because you're going to have just pretty much general chlorosis and stunting. And we can associate those symptoms to a lot of different things, right? So that's the one thing that can be a little bit tricky on those. And this is an example of one that pH does have a played influence. So again, it's going to be a lot more timing, but also if we look at pH, that's going to have an influence on it. All right, this one may be a little bit easier. What did we see? What are you guys seeing on this wheat here? That's not normal. Discoloring, white, bleaching. Any guesses what this is? Command. So the reason we picked this one and put this one in here is because of tobacco acres. Okay, so command is used a lot in those acres, and talking to Andy, our tobacco specialist, he says, I like it because it has grass control, right? Well, guess what? It does a pretty good job on wheat too, right? So, this is probably maybe a little bit more severe. I applied this at the time I planted it, put on some higher rates, so it may not be something we typically see, but just showing you some of those symptoms. We're seeing that whitening, that bleaching, and these will actually, this white will actually start to go necrotic as we go along. So actually, we're inhibiting those pigments and we'll actually kill those plants because, or at least that tissue will start to die because we don't have any pigments in there. Any questions on this one? All right, I know I wrote some notes on that. So, all right, what about this one? What's going on here?
Germination's not very good if it's planted all at the same time.
This is all planted at the same time. Not very good germination, right? So if we look, you can see some of those wheat plants as they're coming up. They're twisting a little bit. Maybe a little bit of improper unfurling. What might cause that? Again, I'm giving you a pretty extreme case here. All right, so this is actually group 15 herbicide. So this is Outlook. Again, the only reason I picked it is I put it pretty late, as it's something we can put out fairly late in corn, directed. And so again, it's not something I expect to see a whole lot, but giving you some examples of what, there's several group 15s out there of what group 15s can do, and you can see it beat up the ryegrass quite a bit as well, okay? So that's what that is. All right, last one. And you asked me if this is a trick, right? It's not a trick, it's just not the right timing. So did anyone see any symptoms on this one? Not really. This is atrazine. Tell me why I'm not seeing symptoms on this yet. I sprayed it last week. Sprayed it and planted it last week. Anybody have any ideas? You're getting there. So, what kind of weather have we had for the last week, last couple days? Cool, cloudy, okay? So, atrazine is a photosystem inhibitor, photosystem 2 inhibitor. What do we have to get that to work? You need some photosynthesis. We haven't had a whole lot of that. And the other thing is, so for example, this herbicide here is active on the plant as it's emerging, right? It's a shoot inhibitor. Atrazine, actually, the plant has to come out of the ground pull in that herbicide and then start to photosynthesize before that herbicide will start to cause that injury. So this is actually one's a little tricky because your wheat will come out of the ground, look great. You get a little bit of atrazine uptake, and what we're going to see on this, and I think in a couple of days we'll see this, and if you look closely you can start to see it, but you'll actually see the tips start to go necrotic, okay? So necrosis at the tips of those plants is what's going to tell us that we have some atrazine carryover, and that's probably one that we see a lot of injury on as well. So between all of these, the command and the atrazine are probably going to be the two that you see. And again, it's all about timing. The command, for putting it out, going out a little bit later in tobacco, and the atrazine, it's all about what timing and your rate that you had that's going to cause that. And then again, your weather patterns. Was it dry? Was it not dry? All right. So unfortunately, I was really hoping to have some good symptoms on this, but come back in a couple days and I might be able to show you some if you're interested.
So if you spray residual too early, does it look like that, Trey?
Yeah, you're gonna have it start to look like this. Yep. So, and we'll get to that. So yeah, if you spray that residua, so we're gonna talk about that on the ryegrass. If you spray that residua, and you miss that timing, you're too early, we're getting this. So that's what the group 15s do. So, any other question? That's a good question. All right. So that'll take us into our next area. All right. So what we're going to do is talk a little bit about, we're going to focus on ryegrass. Okay. That's the weed that we have to focus on, thinking about early season weed management. All right. Why are we concerned about ryegrass early in the season? Any guesses, ideas, thoughts? It's your best shot. There you go. That's really when we need to be getting out there. All right. So what we have set up here, actually so with our ryegrass, so do we have some issues with ryegrass as far as herbicide resistance goes in the state? What do we have resistance to? Right. What else do we have resistance to? Or ALS inhibitors, right? So we're starting to see more and more of that. So it really limits our options post-emergence, doesn't it? So that's why we really have to focus on the upfront and really start to think about a program where we're trying to take care of that ryegrass early on. Okay? So what we're doing with that is, ryegrass is an issue in wheat just simply because they have the same life cycle, right? And that's pretty typical, right? And we don't have a lot of herbicides to control it. So with these, what we're doing is we're going after them with some of our pre-emerge herbicides, but you can't actually spray it pre, and we'll go right back to that question, because if you spray it pre, what do you have? You get some of this, right? So what kind of timing are we looking at on these? So let's look at examples, something like Zidua or Anthem Flex. Those are both used in pyroxasulfone. So when 80% of it's germinated and it has at least half-inch long shoot until wheat spiking, how long of a duration is that? 2 or 3 days, yeah. It's not very long, right? That's a window, that's a tight window to fit into, right? Especially if you have a lot of acres to cover, okay? But if we can hit this window, what we're doing is basically we're allowing that wheat, so these are shoot growth inhibitors, right? We're allowing that wheat to get the shoot out, and then we're putting it down, and the hope is that your ryegrass isn't also putting out the shoot, right? Because that's the trick, right? Because if your ryegrass is already emerging, Zidua does nothing to it either, okay? So You know, the ideal situation is we can do a burn down. If we have some ryegrass that's already emerged, we can burn it down, and we can hopefully get out there right at that timing and make that delayed pre-application and be able to control that ryegrass, and that gives us some residual. Okay, so what we have up here is some of these example products that we have listed here. So some of those that we can spray. So Axiom's another one. Axiom, we have a little bit bigger window. We're 2-leaf wheat to and pre-emergence up to 1-leaf ryegrass. So with this one, you know, we're doing spike to 2-leaf wheat, but again, really we like to have most of this on before the ryegrass starts to emerge. So that's key for that one. Yeah, Prowl. Prowl has a pretty long window that we can apply it, but again, if the ryegrass is up, the Prowl's not doing anything for you, right? So we have to have something else in there to take care of our ryegrass, and then Zidua and Anthem Flex. And then actually, it's not on here, but Valent just got approval for Fierce, okay? So Fierce can now be planted 14 days pre-plant. So you have to be at least 14 days. And the other key for these is planting depth. We need to be down about 1 inch. And that gets us out of that herbicide zone is what it's doing for us, okay? And then again, you can also see on these pyroxasulfone, there's actually an early post application. So again, this is great because it gives you a little bit more of a window to spray, right? But what's the crux of this? Say, okay, I'll just wait until my wheat is past spike and I can have up to that 4th tiller to spray. What's the problem? The ryegrass is already gone, right? Because the ryegrass is coming up at the same time. So I guess what I'm saying is not really an easy answer. It kind of depends on your season and how, you know, how Mother Nature plays, if she plays nice or not. Really kind of. But if we're willing to try these out, that gives us a good chance. The other issue with these is we can get injury from these, okay? And especially if we miss that timing, but even if we get the right timing, we can see some injury from these products on that wheat. So what we have up here, we have the 4 different pre's that I showed you, and actually I cheated because I can control things in the greenhouse, and I planted the wheat first, and I let it get to the stage I wanted it, and then I sprayed, and then I planted the ryegrass. So that's a little bit unfair, right? But that's what we went about it with, okay? Have any of you guys used these products, had any luck with them? So if we get them on, that works great, right? So what we have here, here's your Axiom, and that's that mixture of flufenicet and metribuzin. So we have a few ryegrass coming through. And then this one here, we have Prowl. How'd that do? Yeah. Not great. What was the problem here? What's that? It wasn't up. Nope, the grass wasn't up, but we just sprayed it, let it sit. We didn't really incorporate it or anything. So Prowl can be pretty finicky, right? So we have to have either good activating rain or see if we can incorporate that a little bit. So I guess if you're going to put it on the list, it doesn't always fall at the top of that list. And then we have our 2 Zidua, or our 2 pyroxasulfone products. Here's Zidua, that's pyroxasulfone by itself. And here's Anthem Flex, and that's got the Cadet in it as well. So you can see a few ryegrass plants coming through, but these were planted at the same density as all these others. So you can see how much it's holding back. So we're just showing you that residual. If I can hold back that many plants, then when it comes time, I probably still am going to have to come back out and make a post application. But getting out there in front, and if I can get that timing right, I save myself a lot of hassle later in the season trying to take care of that ryegrass control with post applications. And then I also, if I'm not dealing with ALS resistance yet, I'm taking a little bit of pressure off those herbicides, right? Okay. Any questions on these? And I'll leave these up here. You guys feel free to come check them out. And again, I also mentioned that Fierce now has a label in Kentucky that we can spray at 14 days pre-plant. So that Fierce also has Zidua in it, or pyroxasulfone. So again, that's the product that's really doing the work for us. Okay.
So after the 14 days, it's not gonna affect the shoot of the wheat?
So that's where you're.
Still gonna work on the ryegrass?
So that's where you're. So that's where your planting depth's gonna play a role. So if we plant that shallow and plant it right there into that herbicide zone, you're not going to be happy with it. So that's and the idea is that 14 days. And the other thing is you have that flumioxazin in there, and that's going to really ding up your wheat quite a bit too. And that's where they've really stretched it and trying to get some of that activity down essentially. But if it's dry, right, then you might still get some pretty big injuries. So that's one that we just have to kind of keep an eye on. So, all right. Now, if you say, okay, I didn't get my pre's on, or I'm just going to depend post-emergence, right? What are our options? And guys, I should have told you, you have all this in your tablet, but basically this came right out of the weed control guide, the Kentucky Weed Control Guide. But basically, I gave you the 4 products that we can use post-emergence on ryegrass, okay? So, and I have those all laid out here, up front here. And you guys can look at these, but there's not a whole lot to look at yet. Again, I sprayed these a week ago. I probably should have done it about a week and a half, 2 weeks ago. It's always finding that sweet spot in the greenhouse of, okay, I know my training's coming up, right? But I don't want to spray too early, because then if everything's dead, that's no fun. But then I waited too long and I don't really have much to show yet. So, but you can certainly start to see these symptoms starting to show up. You can start to see that ryegrass starting to redden up a little bit. And we did get a little bit of injury on our wheat, but again, that's just a little bit of effect of being in the greenhouse. So what we have is, if you do go post-emergence, Axial XL. So if you're dealing with ALS-resistant ryegrass and you're spraying post-emergence, this is about your only option, right? So this is Group 1 herbicide, and it's about the only herbicide that we have available if you're dealing with ALS-resistant ryegrass. So the suggestion would be, if you have ALS-resistant ryegrass, is to be using one of these pre-emerge products and then catching your escapes with this. We would discourage you from just going out with this, because what are we doing when we're only making this one herbicide application to ryegrass? That's right. We're just driving resistance, right? We're just going down that road, and there's some suspicion that we might already have some of this as well. So we'll see about that. And again, you only get one treatment per season, and you do have a fairly big window within your wheat to make this application. But for your optimum control, really your timing is going to have to be to your ryegrass. Emergence up to that third tiller. Once we get past that third tiller, it gets a little bit troublesome. Okay? And then we have Finesse. You'll see that next. And then you'll see we have Osprey and Powerflex. Okay? So I kind of grouped these a little bit together. All of these are your ALS inhibitors, correct? So, and also in your guide, I gave you this sheet here that kind of gives you your efficacy ratings on your ryegrass, and you'll see those are the 4 that stick out as having good control. But with that Finesse, all of those, the problem is, if you read each and every one of these, they're all going to have this line right here. We will not control ALS-resistant ryegrass, because these are ALS inhibitors. So if we have resistance in your population, these are products that are not going to work for you. If you don't have resistance yet, what should you not do? Should I just go ahead and just spray this and this alone? No, right? So that's, again, the reason why we're talking about this now is to really think about, should we apply some of these pre-emerge herbicides and again, take some of the pressure off of these, okay? So I'll give you guys a chance if you want to come up here and look at these. Do we have any questions about ryegrass control? Certainly one thing I'll say is this is not the done deal, right? Always read your labels. But yeah, certainly, because when you're going to go out and be making these applications, right, there's going to be more than ryegrass out there. So if you're making your pass, you might as well put in your broadleaf herbicide as well, especially with this one, because all this is controlling is your grasses. This is not going to control any broadleaves. So it's a good question. So the reason behind having 10 gallon per acre is it goes back to, this is a systemic herbicide. And it goes back to that concentration. So we're trying to increase the concentration in that droplet that's on that leaf so we get more uptake into the plant. And the idea behind that is, when are we applying these products? Fall, right? What kind of weather do we have? What kind of beautiful day do we have today, right? We're applying these in not the ideal weather conditions. The ideal weather conditions for really any systemic herbicide is a nice sunny warm day where those plants are just growing like crazy, right? Growing like weeds, that's right. But we don't have those conditions when we make these applications, and we're forced to make these applications because it's all about timing on the size of that ryegrass. And so that's why we're going down to that, is we need to maximize how much uptake of that herbicide we have. And you know, if you go back, you know, glyphosate for a long time, we said drop those spray volumes, and we're just increasing and when we do that, we're increasing the concentration of that herbicide in that spray droplet. So trying to get as much uptake as we can in unideal conditions. So if you have nice conditions, 15 GPA will probably do just fine, but really just trying to maximize those products. All right, well, that's really all I have for you guys.